The committee meets today to hear testimony on the deployment of National Guardsmen domestically to assist with immigration enforcement and to help restore law and order in our cities. I welcome three witnesses today. We are joined by Mr. Charles Young, the Principal Deputy General Counsel for the Department of Defense. We have Mr. Roosevelt Ditlevson, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and America's Security Affairs. And we will hear from General Gregory M. Gio, Commander of the United States Northern Command. In recent years, violent crime, rioting, drug trafficking, and heinous gang activity have steadily escalated. The Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Statistics has released data on these trends. According to the Bureau's National Crime Victimization Survey, the rate of violent crime in urban areas increased by 61% from 2019 to 2024, 61%. Last year, the rate of violent crime in urban areas was 46% higher than the national rate, and it was 104% higher than the rural rate. These statistics are clear. Public safety is at risk in our cities, and we are in need of well-supported and effective law enforcement. This situation was made all the worse during the Biden administration. We saw widespread efforts by Democrats to defund the police. These moves constricted law enforcement effectiveness across the nation. For one example, consider Seattle in 2020. Hundreds of violent protesters took over several downtown blocks. They declared it a police-free zone and demanded that the police budget be cut in half. And apparently it did become a police-free zone. In the absence of all police presence, violence, open drug usage, and shootings escalated. All the while, the city's elected officials did little to stop the chaos. This is but one example of what happens without sufficient law and order. Now, I would be remiss at this time if I did not recognize that in trying to restore that law and order, there are costs. In particular, I'm reminded of the two West Virginia National Guard members who were shot in this city just before the Thanksgiving holiday. Today, we remember Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, who lost her life, and we grieve with her loved ones. Air Force Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf remains hospitalized, but is showing signs of progress, and we likewise pray for his swift recovery. The public sees these examples of crime in their communities, and they expect more from their government. They demand and deserve action. For this reason, President Trump ordered an immediate and coordinated response by deploying the National Guard to some of our nation's most dangerous cities. These strategic deployments are not only appropriate but essential. Current crime rates in our largest cities have become a substantial burden on local and federal law enforcement agencies. Increasingly, these agencies are unable to keep our communities safe. They are underfunded and stretched thin, unable to reinstitute law and order on their own. The Guard is uniquely suited to assist with the fight against crime. It can provide manpower, resources, and specialized expertise that local police departments may lack. Additionally, National Guard units are trained for rapid deployment. They're versatile, able to handle large-scale public safety operations and provide immediate relief to communities in need. In fact, the National Guard has a strong history of assisting in domestic law enforcement during times of national crisis. Their expertise in crowd control, search and rescue operations, and logistical support makes them well-suited for urban environments struggling with crime-related violence. Not surprisingly, Democratic governors and left-wing pundits have decried these deployments. They've raised concerns about violations of the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits the use of military for domestic policing, except in specific circumstances. Others have said these deployments waste money and reduce troop readiness. These concerns are both manufactured and misguided, in my judgment. Mobilizing the Guard is an excellent opportunity for units to enhance cohesion, complete mission essential tasks, and ensure training is complete. Moreover, Guardsmen operate with the highest degree of professionalism. They serve purely in support roles, never crossing the line into law enforcement functions. They are limited to protecting federal employees and federal buildings, providing logistics and communications to law enforcement operations, and most importantly, to providing a visible security presence, which supports law enforcement and deters crime. Furthermore, all National Guardsmen serving in our cities operate under the standing rules of the use of force. These rules prohibit the use of force except in instances of self-defense. All Guardsmen receive extensive training on these rules. I'm confident in their ability to operate within them. I'm proud of the Guardsmen serving in our nation's capital and in cities throughout America. I thank them for their service and sacrifice and for their commitment to restoring law and order. Every day they help Americans feel safe in their communities. With that, I turn to my colleague, Senator Duckworth. And Senator Duckworth, I hope your voice is in better shape than mine this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you to Ranking Member Reed, again, Chairman Wicker and Leader Thune for working with me to hold this meeting. I first want to acknowledge the horrific shooting in D.C., as the Chairman has already acknowledged, resulting in the tragic death of Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and injury of Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf. These heroes served with honor and showed up to do the mission despite the risks, as our service members always do. It is a tragedy that never should have happened in the first place. That is exactly why I led my colleagues to push for this hearing. Military service involves risks, and our service members accept those risks knowingly, selflessly. So we better be damn sure that the mission is the right one. That it is a clear and effective mission, that it serves our national security. If we stand by while this administration pursues another irresponsible, open-ended campaign with no defined mission, no clear authorities, no set timeline, and no transparent end state, we fail our troops. We fail their families, and we fail the American people. Today, we must shine a light on the cost of these domestic deployments to the American people and to those who wear the uniform of this great nation. I look forward to getting answers about where this administration's crusade of misusing the military in American cities is going, and hearing how anyone can justify the damage it is doing to our service members, to civil rights, our public trust in the military, and our service members' ability to execute their critical war-fighting missions. Look, one of the proudest moments in my life was when the first time I ever raised my hand to swear my oath to the Constitution as a member of the Illinois Army National Guard. I cherished every day, every single day that I got to call myself a soldier. And it's because I love our military so deeply that I refuse to let anyone, including the president, abuse it for their own gain. Right now, thousands of troops are deployed across the country under false pretenses. Here in D.C., the National Guard has been performing missions that don't help with their military training, like spreading mulch and picking up trash, but that, as we have sadly seen, nonetheless carry risk for our service members. Let me be clear, safety in our community is paramount, but these deployments do not make our streets safer. They do not keep our families more secure. In fact, it is just the opposite. Instead, President Trump has taken our troops away from their core mission just to do his personal bidding, forcing them to patrol tourist areas in D.C. or invade a city where residents are peacefully protesting his inhumane policies. We know Trump's actions are not about so-called law and order. If he cared about law and order, he wouldn't have quite literally defunded our police by freezing and slashing federal dollars that help to hire, train, and equip law enforcement. If this administration cared about law and order, it would not be ignoring the growing number of judges, including those appointed by Trump himself, who've deemed these deployments illegal. In Illinois, a judge from the Northern District found that DHS's account of the situation on the ground, and I quote, was simply unreliable, end quote. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, in a 3-judge panel that featured 2 Republican-appointed judges, including a Trump appointee, upheld this view that, and I quote, the facts do not justify the president's action, end quote. These judges went further, explaining that political opposition is not rebellion, and reaffirming that First Amendment activity in Illinois is not the sort of threat that would justify a military deployment. Similarly, another Trump-appointed federal judge, this time in Oregon, wrote that the administration had no credible evidence that the protests had gotten out of control and that the president's basis for deploying the Guard was untethered to the facts. Our troops deserve to know why they are being asked to do such legally unprecedented and deeply unpopular things on American soil. And make no mistake, this is deeply unpopular. Most Americans don't want this. Poll after poll has found that a majority of Americans oppose deploying troops for missions that should be handled by law enforcement. This all raises a core question for our hearing today. Why is this administration so focused on turning our military against Americans here at home? Our military's #1 priority must be readiness. We face real growing threats from China, Russia, Iran, and more bad actors on a global stage. The Department of Defense needs to be laser focused on preparing our troops to defend America's interests abroad, not performing tasks that are meant to be done by civilian law enforcement here at home. No one else can do the critical work of keeping our families safe from these actual threats. And our troops are already stretched thin for time and resources, yet these deployments are burning priceless readiness, morale, and resources on open-ended, unjustified missions. So far, this administration is estimated to have spent over $341.3 million on the deployments to Illinois, LA, Oregon, DC, and Memphis alone, not including the cost of thousands of troops along the border. But these costs are tabulated in more than taxpayer dollars and cannot be overstated, nor can the risk that comes with politicizing our troops for one man's gain. So let me close with this. Enabling the president, any president, to send military troops into American cities under transparently flimsy pretexts to meet his whims will have a dangerous and profoundly damaging impact on our nation's military. Our heroes did not sign up for this. They signed up to defend Americans' rights to free speech, not to intimidate Americans from exercising that right. They were willing to die to defend this country, not to defend one man's partisan agenda. We cannot stay silent as our troops' willingness to sacrifice is abused, or as President Trump erodes the hard-won trust our military has earned from the American public. Because while our armed forces have a sacred role in our country, public trust can be easily lost when the commander-in-chief uses them so recklessly, especially when that commander-in-chief has already gone so far as to suggest that the military uses American cities as, and I quote, training grounds for, again, I quote the president, the war within. Look, these days, I may no longer be wearing my Army uniform, but it is still hanging up in my closet. But as a senator and as a member of this committee, my core mission remains the same as when I was in the National Guard, to keep America as strong and as safe as she should be. The power to deploy our troops domestically must remain exceptional, accountable, and rooted in law, not in one man's judgment about what constitutes disorder. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm so outraged. That is why I am so determined to make sure that, for the sake of our troops, we get some answers today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Let me observe that my Air Force uniform is also hanging up in my closet, but there's no way I could get into it at this point. Let me just mention for the purposes of our audience that these three witnesses were chosen by the leadership of this committee by consensus, and we welcome them here today. Mr. Ditlevson, your opening statement, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the Department of War's role in supporting Homeland Defense, particularly regarding the mobilization of the National Guard. As the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of War for Homeland Defense and America's Security Affairs, I oversee the policies and plans related to these missions, and I welcome the opportunity to brief you today. The Trump administration has taken every available opportunity to restore law and order in the United States. To that end, the department has reinvested in its relationship with our federal, state, and local partners to strengthen safety within our country. Americans must know that they can walk home at night, that they can take their children to the playground, that they can exist without fear of being attacked. President Trump promised law and order, And through his fearless leadership, he is delivering. Promises made, promises kept. The Department of War, and specifically the National Guard, plays a crucial role in responding to a variety of domestic challenges, from protecting federal facilities and personnel to supporting law enforcement and disaster relief efforts. The importance of the National Guard in this mission comes straight from the top. Secretary Hegseth, a decorated former member of the D.C. National Guard, is ardent and steadfast in the critical role the National Guard plays in supporting law enforcement and keeping the American people safe. Our efforts are guided by a comprehensive legal and policy framework undergirded, most importantly, by the Constitution of the United States. We prioritize strict adherence to legal parameters in all of our activities while faithfully executing the President and Secretary's direction. To do otherwise would jeopardize good order and discipline and would be dangerous and irresponsible. Recent executive orders and presidential memorandums have directed DoW to provide specific support in several key areas. Currently, the National Guard is deployed in several states under both Title X and Title 32 authorities, providing support for a diverse set of missions, including federal protection missions in California, Illinois, and Oregon, support to federal law enforcement in Tennessee, and restoring law and order in our nation's capital. We are committed to ensuring that all National Guard personnel are properly trained and equipped for these missions. Every single service member undergoes specialized training before being entrusted with the duty to protect American citizens. We emphasize de-escalation techniques, respect for civil liberties, and adherence to the rules for the use of force. We also work closely with state governments and other federal agencies to ensure a coordinated and effective response to domestic challenges. The Department of War understands the concerns surrounding the use of National Guard in domestic operations. We are committed to transparency and accountability in all of our activities. We strive to balance readiness for both domestic and overseas missions, adapting our training and resourcing to meet evolving needs. My office is committed to ensuring that these resources are used effectively and responsibly, as we have throughout President Trump's time in office. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to answering the committee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ditlevson. Mr. Young, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of this committee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on the important topic of National Guard mobilizations. The overarching concern in all of our National Guard deployments is to ensure that our communities remain safe places where our citizens can enjoy their constitutionally protected rights in peace, and where federal officers can perform their valid federal functions without fear of being physically harmed. When the Department of War receives a presidential mobilization order, Supreme Court precedents requires that we presume that he exercised his statutory and constitutional authorities as the Commander-in-Chief in a manner consistent with the law. These lawful orders, given in exigent circumstances, requires the Department of War to rapidly muster a response to prevent loss of life, of limb, and property in emergency situations. The Department issues carefully tailored guidance to commanders and mobilized National Guard personnel, focusing their mission on the protection of federal functions, personnel, and property. In doing so, the Department has operated well within the law established by longstanding Supreme Court precedent and longstanding Department of Justice legal opinions. The Department of War has also received, evaluated, and responded to numerous requests for assistance from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice under well-established statutory frameworks for assisting other federal agencies in performing their federal functions and in assisting state and local law enforcement authorities. The dedicated women of our National Guard have selflessly stepped forward to heed the call of duty and have served our nation with distinction. From all reports, they are well received by the citizens they serve and have comported themselves in an exemplary manner. As a result of their service, our communities are safer. Our federal law enforcement officers can more safely perform their legal functions, and obstructions to the proper execution of federal laws are being removed. I look forward to answering your questions.
Well, thank you very, very much. And now, General Guillot, you are welcome here and recognized for your opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and the distinguished members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to appear today alongside Mr. Ditlevson and Mr. Young regarding the deployments of the National Guard in Title X status within the United States. I'd like to start by acknowledging the essential role of the Army and Air National Guard teammates play in defending the homeland every day. Right now, Guardsmen under the command and control of NORAD and U.S. NORTHCOM are defending against ballistic missile threats, protecting national airspace, supporting federal law enforcement, and helping seal and repel illegal activity at the southern border. In fact, there isn't a single NORAD or U.S. NORTHCOM mission that doesn't rely on our National Guard teammates. I'll center my comments this morning on United States Northern Command's roles and responsibilities in commanding and controlling Title X forces conducting the Federal Protection Mission in support of federal law enforcement agencies. At the direction of the President and the Secretary of War, Army National Guard personnel operating in Title X status are tasked with protecting federal functions, which includes property, entities, and federal personnel performing federal functions, including enforcement of federal law in California, Oregon, and Illinois. There are also currently 200 National Guard personnel in Title X status at Fort Bliss, Texas, who are available for this mission if necessary. The assigned forces in all 4 locations operate under the command and control of U.S. NORTHCOM while reporting to U.S. Army North. This provides a unified command structure that ensures disciplined execution of the assigned missions and clear accountability. Accountability and adherence to all applicable laws and policies are critical, and U.S. NORTHCOM will continue to comply with all laws, regulations, and applicable court orders. In adherence with federal court rulings, personnel in Oregon and Illinois remain federalized on Title X status, but are not executing the Federal Protection Operational Mission. Meanwhile, 100 service members in California in Title X status are executing the Federal Protection Mission in accordance with a stay issued by the Ninth Circuit as litigation continues to progress. NORTHCOM is in coordination with the department regarding the order issued yesterday by the District Court in California. From the outset, I've directed that every service member participating in federal protection missions be thoroughly trained on their authorities and limitations. It is essential that everyone involved in this mission understands precisely what they are authorized to do, but perhaps more importantly, what they are authorized not to do. To be clear, Title X forces are prohibited from conducting traditional law enforcement activities, including arrest, seizure, search, or evidence collection in connection with the enforcement of laws. Their mission is to take reasonable measures to protect the destruction or defacement of federal government property, including preventing civilians from attacking federal facilities, stopping ongoing interference with federal functions by civilians, or preventing civilians with a demonstrated intent to interfere with the federal functions from such interference. The mission also includes protecting federal personnel from harm or threat of death or bodily injury. As such, service members may temporarily restrain civilians, conduct cursory searches, or take other similar measures to ensure safety of the persons on the property. To date, only 1 civilian has been temporarily detained by military personnel. That occurred on June 13th when, despite verbal warnings, an individual crossed a clearly marked boundary surrounding the Wilshire Federal Building in Los Angeles. In accordance with applicable law and policies, that individual was only detained until they could be handed over to proper law enforcement personnel. Title X forces are present to protect federal property and federal personnel in the execution of their responsibility to enforce federal law, not to replace them. Local, state, and federal law enforcement remain fully responsible for public safety and policing, while the objectives of the military professionals performing this mission are safety and continuity of the federal functions, and, if necessary, de-escalation, not confrontation. I met a young Marine in Los Angeles this summer, and when I asked him to describe his assigned mission, he told me that it was to ensure that the American citizens exercising their right to peaceful assembly and protest were able to do so safely. I think that sums up both the mission and the professionalism of the service members assigned to this mission very well. The Federal Protection Mission is an example of the Department's unique capability to support partners during extraordinary circumstances. NORAD and U.S. NORTHCOM are proud of the command's ability to rapidly deploy trained, disciplined forces when and wherever they're needed, and the well-trained, professional, and ready National Guard is crucial to that effort. Again, I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, General, and I think I'll start with you. Specifically, why bring the Guard in? What does it offer that law enforcement and other federal agencies cannot do?
First and foremost, Chairman, they are extremely disciplined, and they can very quickly be trained to conduct any mission that we task of them. When they come in, we train them on what they're authorized to do, which is rooted in the Mayday opinion and their 12406 authorities, and also the Secretary's directive action, which is to prevent destruction and defacement of the federal facilities and to protect the execution of federal functions. They can do that because they're disciplined, they're well-trained, and they very well understand the limits of their authorities.
Well, what are the benefits to the Guard? My first question was the benefits to the community and what they could bring, but what about the individuals that are being deployed? Or do they benefit from this also?
Yes, sir, they do. We work very closely with the tags from each state to ensure that the training they receive not only benefits them in their federal function that they're performing for us, but also in their state role. So in the conduct of the mission, they get not only training on the standing for the rules of use of force, and also the civil disturbance operations that they could potentially execute, but they get small unit training, they get all of their medical training complete, they get all of their weapons qualifications and many other small unit tactics that benefit them in both statuses. Also, at this time, the majority of those serving in this role are volunteers, so it helps them in their pursuit of a career. And then it also allows us to trade out people who are assigned but maybe have school or other functions to ensure that the people that are serving not only are very good at their job, but they want to be there, and they're there on voluntary status.
Mr. Young, you're the counsel in this panel. Tell us what the Posse Comitatus Act is and how this deployment, this type of deployment we're talking about today, does not violate the Posse Comitatus.
Thank you, Senator. The Posse Comitatus Act was an act that was passed not long after the Civil War that addressed concerns regarding the use of federal troops in conducting domestic law enforcement. Up to that point in our nation's history, there had been a long practice of using federalized troops domestically, and so Congress, in order to make sure that local officials were not able to gain the support or the use of federal troops in dealing with local circumstances, passed the Posse Comitatus Act. It essentially precludes the department and military personnel from being used in a manner that would pervade the local law enforcement and that would subject civilians to direct military authority. And over the course of time, the Department of Justice has analyzed that rule in relation to National Guard deployments. For the vast majority of National Guard deployments, they are considered to be non-federalized. Most of the time that the National Guard is used, they are used under the control, direction, and authority of their governors, and they are in either what is called a state active duty status, or they are in a federally funded but state-controlled status, which is otherwise called Title 32. In both of those circumstances, they are considered to be non-federalized. They're also considered to not be part of the Army. And while that is an important legal distinction, because therefore the Posse Comitatus Act prohibits any part of the Army from being used domestically, and therefore non-federalized National Guard have long been used to be able to conduct domestic law enforcement operations. And there's a very long-standing and consistent practice of using non-federalized National Guard, such as what's here in the district today and what's in Memphis as well today, are in Title 32. The other aspect is the authority of the President as the Article II authority to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed and to protect the sovereign, to be able to use federal forces, whether it be active component troops or whether it be National Guard personnel, to protect federal functions and property.
So just to nail this down, there are federal case law precedents that cause you to believe that what is being done currently is in accordance with federal law.
That's right, Senator, as well as long-established Department of Justice legal opinions that say that when federal functions property are at jeopardy, the Posse Comitatus Act does not limit the President's ability to be able to protect those functions.
All right. Thank you so much. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. The National Guard has been deployed on numerous occasions, but these circumstances seem somewhat unique. And in addition to that, the Secretary of Defense has just ordered the National Guard to create a response force and a nationwide deployable quick reaction force. These forces, let me ask Mr. Diddleson, what is the purpose of these forces, Mr. Diddleson?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Ranking Member. These two situations, the National Guard Response Force and the National Guard Quick Response Force, are already pre-existing functions that are being reorganized and re-equipped to a higher level and modernized to be able to serve their functions better. So these are already existing capabilities within the National Guard, and we're just changing the manner in which they are task organized to be more effective.
So there's no change in mission.
There's no change in mission, that's correct.
So they have to respect the Posse Comitatus Act and not become enforcers of domestic law.
If they are employed in Title 10 status, that is correct, sir.
And Title 32 status would require the concurrence of the governor or not?
That is correct.
Okay. There is when this program was rolled out, Mr. Young, there was a suggestion that one of its main purposes is deterrence, which touches upon a basic right of Americans to come together peacefully and demonstrate in cities and towns across the country. But this deterrence effect, one could argue, could inhibit or is designed effectively to inhibit those assemblies. Would that be constitutional?
Mr. Ranking Member, thank you for the question. I think the presence of National Guard personnel at federal locations is designed to protect those federal property and functions from violence, from the threat of burning a building, of officers being harmed in the execution of their functions, or the impedance of those federal functions. Those functions do not impede in any way or deter people from exercising a valid constitutional right to protest. Obviously, people have protested throughout the history and course of our country in many ways. When they go beyond what is a legal protest and cross the line into violence against federal officials in the execution of that protest, the design for the deployment of these National Guard personnel is to simply protect the federal functions and the personnel that are being harmed.
So you would concur with Judge Breyer in California federal courts, who declared the actions of National Guard and other military as unconstitutional. I believe one of the areas that they were protecting was MacArthur Park, which is not a federal facility, or at least they were making sweeps through MacArthur Park. But you concur with Judge Breyer's conclusion that the President acted unconstitutionally?
No, Senator, I would say that I concur with the Ninth Circuit's decision that the President acted lawfully And I disagree with the district court's decision. I respect the district court's decision. And it's my understanding that the actions in MacArthur Park were designed to protect the federal officers that were otherwise there, that were not uniformed military personnel, that were performing a valid legal federal function.
Thank you. General Guyot, first of all, thank you for your service and your very difficult job of maintaining a balance between your military responsibilities and many of the orders you're given. If you were, if the president declared an organization a terrorist organization or a DTO, which is on a secret list, and you were ordered to attack them on U.S. soil, would you carry out that order?
Senator Reed, as with any order I get, I would assess the order, consult the legal authorities to ensure that it was a lawful order, and I would, if I had questions, I would elevate that to the chairman and the secretary, as they welcome at all times. And if I had no concerns and I was confident in the lawful order, I would definitely execute that order.
You were at Quantico when the president addressed the officers.
I was, sir.
So he said there's an enemy within. And he also said that to these officers, you included, you're going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war too. It's a war from within. The president essentially indicated that you should be prepared to conduct military operations in the United States against this enemy within. Are you doing that?
Sir, I've not been tasked to do anything that reflects what you just said.
Do you have any indication of who this enemy within is?
Sir, I do not have any indications of an enemy within. We maintain readiness to execute the orders, both to defend the homeland in many ways, but I have not been tasked in that way.
Well, I would assume that the enemy within does not include the thousands of people who attacked the Capitol and were later pardoned by President Trump. So it must be some other group of Americans. Thank you.
Senator Cotton.
General Gio, you've been on the job since last year. Have you received any illegal orders this year?
Senator, I've never received any illegal orders throughout my career.
Never once in your entire career.
I have never.
You've been around for a while, haven't you?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay. Mr. Young, I'll just continue down that order. I mean, you have lawyers to make sure that people act lawfully. That's why our combatant commanders have JAGs, why the president has lawyers, why this committee has lawyers, why business executive has lawyers. And isn't it the case that non-lawyers, laymen, don't always know what the law is? Is that so?
Yes, Senator, that's true.
And in your long and illustrious career as a lawyer, I'm sure you've had a client who's asked you whether some course of action is lawful or not, and you've had to tell them, no, that's not lawful, right?
Most certainly, Senator.
And that's why we have lawyers around, is to help inform the decisions of responsible persons who are laymen and who are not actually lawyers, right?
Yes, Senator.
Is there a presumption of lawfulness of orders in the military?
Yes, sir. There is a presumption of lawfulness, not only in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but the Supreme Court precedents that's long established, going back more than 150 years, says that whenever a statutory authority is given to the president, that it's presumed that he is acting in accordance with that law, and longstanding Supreme Court precedent that deals with the necessity for a valid presumption of lawfulness in an order that's issued by the president.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to some other basic questions of constitutional law. I know that you're familiar with them from your time in the department. Does the president, not just this president, but does any president have the constitutional authority to federalize the National Guard to protect innocent life and property?
Senator, the answer to that is, in the Constitution, the states relegated their authority to Congress to be able to call forth the militia in times of exigent circumstances. Congress, in turn, granted that authority to the President through federal statute, which remains in effect today and is the basis for these current deployments.
And that authority extends even to states that refuse to mobilize their National Guard or where governors oppose the president executing that constitutional authority. Is that right?
That's certainly true, sir. We have, in the course of history, been in circumstances where the president's had to mobilize National Guard over the objection of a governor.
Okay. Can you cite any specific precedent of that?
Yes, Senator Cotton, Little Rock, Arkansas.
I thought you might say that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's a very regrettable moment in our state's history when our Democratic governor mobilized the National Guard specifically to obstruct an order to desegregate Little Rock Central High School in 1957, which then forced President Eisenhower to immediately federalize the Guard to ensure those students could actually go to school in accordance with that order. I think I'll just leave it there and say thank you all for your testimony and for your service. And I want to join my colleagues in expressing prayers on behalf of all Arkansans for Specialist Sarah Beckstrom's family and for the continued rapid recovery of Sergeant Andrew Wolf, and support and prayers for all of our Guardsmen, whether they're mobilized right now across the country or somewhere around the world, to include the Arkansas National Guard, who just got here to Washington, D.C. and got out on patrol. So thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to also convey my immense respect for the men and women who serve in the National Guard, and of course, particularly the two brave soldiers who were shot prior to Thanksgiving, one of whom having since tragically passed away. Today's hearing asks a simple but profound question. What kind of country are we becoming? In August, referring to domestic military deployment, the president said, quote, "Not that I don't have the right to do anything I want to do, I'm the president." Quote, in September, he doubled down, admitting he wants to use American cities as, quote, training grounds, end quote, for the military, telling military leaders to, quote, handle the, quote, enemy from within, before it gets out of control. So we have a president who does not believe that the rule of law applies to him. We have a president who believes that whatever he does and says is lawful. That's why whenever we have witnesses saying that they abide by lawful orders of the president, it makes me question what you think is lawful, because you all believe with the president that whatever he says and does is lawful. Over the past year, this regime has deployed National Guard troops into American cities under legal theories that are untested at best and at worst stretch the law beyond recognition. They have used vague claims of rebellion and chaos to justify putting soldiers with rifles and military vehicles onto our streets, even as crime in many of these cities has actually fallen. Now, this is a regime that does not use facts as the basis for their decisions. We are not here today because local law enforcement failed. We are here because the Trump regime chooses to treat ordinary public safety challenges as a pretext for a sweeping show of force. Again, this isn't about the effectiveness of local law enforcement. How do we know? Because this regime has cut over $800 million in Department of Justice grants to state and local law enforcement for community safety initiatives like policing and violence prevention. We'll hear a lot of illegal stuff, I call it, today, Title 10 versus Title 32, the reach of Section 12406, posse comitatus, but behind those legal debates is a basic question about how we think about the use of power in our democracy. When Americans step out of Union Station in Washington, D.C., for example, do we want them to see soldiers on street corners, military trucks at intersections, and the visible sign of a police state? Or do we want them to see the openness, the energy, and the confidence of a democracy that does not need to put troops on its streets to feel secure? And right now, The daily relationship between Americans and the DC National Guard is being fundamentally altered. These deployments are changing how people experience their own capital city and how they view our military. This is not normal. Don't tell me it's normal to have National Guard in, where are the cities? LA, Portland, Chicago, DC, Memphis. Don't tell me this is normal. It is not normal for a president to attack blue cities controlled by Democratic mayors or governors in blue states. This regime has pushed boundaries that prior presidents, Republicans and Democrats alike, respected for generations. And that has to do with the non-politicizing of the military. The American people deserve answers to what we're doing in deploying all these troops to our cities. And, I just want to ask Mr. Young, the president at one point said that protesters should be shot in the street. Is that a legal order? He
Senator,
put no conditions
I'm not
on that.
aware of the president giving any order to that nature or effect.
He said it to Secretary Esper.
Senator, I'm not
Take my
aware of
word
that,
for
and
it,
I'm not sure when
okay.
that conversation may or may not have
Let's
occurred.
say that the president issued such an order. He said so. He said so, okay? Is that a legal order?
Senator, orders to that effect would depend on the circumstances.
Well, the
in
president
that the-
applied no conditions. So we have a president who doesn't think that the rule of law applies to him, and he wants to show force. And the question I have for Mr. Ditlevson is, I'd like to know what kind of assessments were done as to the impact of these kinds of deployments that have already used up $340 million to date and more, as long as these troops are going to be continued to deploy to the cities that I've mentioned and others. Like, what kind of assessment done by whom as to what the impact of these deployments are on our readiness and other questions that should be of significance?
Can you
for
answer that question briefly, Mr. Ditlevson?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question, Senator. In the department, we are constantly assessing all costs related to these deployments, readiness costs, fiscal costs, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt, this is not having a negative effect. This is a modest burden on the department. Most of these deployments are reimbursable in nature. They're not a Department of War bill. And the number of troops that have been deployed are very small relative to the overall National Guard force. And the National Guard Bureau has given us those assessments and said this is not negatively affecting them.
Thank you.
I find
Thank you,
that hard to
Senator
believe.
Hirono.
Thank you.
And Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, good morning. I thank you for taking the time to participate in this, and I recognize that as the committee has asked, we brought you in here because we want to learn as much as possible and share that with the American public. I'd also like to take this time to, as my other colleagues have done, to recognize the Guardsmen who are keeping our capital city safe, especially the two West Virginians who were so viciously attacked last month. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and her family grieving her tragic loss, and Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, who survived but has a long road to recovery ahead. Their presence in America's capital made a significant difference, and we honor their service and their sacrifice. Gentlemen, as you know, the National Guard has been deployed to assist with domestic security since before the Constitution was written. Our National Guard has often been deployed to assist in law enforcement operations when state and local authorities were unwilling or unable to do so, ranging from enforcing desegregation laws to helping quell riots. Based on your analysis of historical deployments of the National Guard, do these deployments initiated by the current administration deviate in any material way from the domestic National Guard deployments initiated by previous administrations? And I'm going to start with Mr. Young. I'd really like you, if you could, you've kind of done it a little bit for a number of different members, but you've given a historical context for the legal framework and the use of federal troops for domestic missions. But could you take a few minutes and kind of bring the committee and those listening kind of up to speed as to how this works and the political background on how we actually use the National Guard throughout our history and the legal framework for doing so.
Thank you, Senator. I'd be happy to. The nation established a framework of state, federal authorities in being able to administer the National Guard. And in many ways, as the country developed, the National Guard was considered the force of first resort, rather than bringing in troops from the regular Army or the active component Army or Navy or Air Force. The Founding Fathers wanted to resort to utilizing the National Guard because they were citizens and from the communities that were involved. And these books that I have here are just books on the role of federal military forces in domestic disorders. And there's tons of examples of that. It's quite voluminous. There's lots of examples over the course of the nation's history. And most of the deployments that are done in the cooperation or with the cooperation of state authorities. State authorities ask for it. State authorities are in control. Most of them are state-funded many times and state-operated. But there are times when, say, for instance, in Katrina, and needing to be able to address a disaster that was coupled with civil disturbance, the scope and magnitude of the circumstances or the nature of it necessitate federal funding, but they're still under state control. But the Constitution recognized that there would be certain exigent times at which time the country and the president would need to be able to act quickly and be able to mobilize the militia to be able to respond to the threats that were present. And they're enumerated not only in the Constitution, but in the statute that you wrote.
And when we talk about federal funding, but under state control, we call that Title 32. If it's under federal funding and under the direction of the president, it's Title 10. Fair to separate?
That's accurate, Senator.
And so in this particular case, we have two different sections that are utilized. Can you share for just a minute, please, how critical it is to be able to differentiate between those two uses for the National Guard and the training that goes in to the Guardsmen and their officers about how to understand the differences, please?
Yes, Senator. The distinction is critical. When National Guard personnel are in a Title 32 status, they're subject to the control, direction, and authority of state officials. The governor is their commander-in-chief. When they are ordered to federal service, that, by federal law, 32 U.S.C. 325, that relationship with the state is severed by federal law, and the president becomes their commander-in-chief through the commander of NORTHCOM. And that then governs the rules for the use of force. When they're in state authority, they're following state rules, state law, state responsibilities. When they're in a Title 10 status, they're following the standard rules for the use of force that are under General Guillot's concern, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I begin again, as many others have, just expressing condolences to the family of Sarah Beckstrom, 20-year-old specialist from Webster County, West Virginia. She enlisted in the West Virginia Army National Guard when she was a senior in high school. Andrew Wolf, the staff sergeant, 24 years old, who is, thank God, recovering in critical condition, but recovering from Martinsburg, had been in the Guard, also enrolled in his senior year in high school. I also want to mention to other colleagues a name that hasn't been mentioned, Alabama Staff Sergeant Jacob Hill, 30-year-old, who had served in the Guard for 13 years. He died during the deployment to D.C. in a non-duty medical emergency when he was stationed at residing in a hotel in Virginia. He died on the 13th of November. The D.C. deployment has been the subject of a litigation, and I want to read the ruling of the court in District of Columbia versus Donald J. Trump from November 20, 2025, 6 days before the two soldiers were assassinated. Here is the ruling of the court. First, the DoD defendants have exceeded the bounds of their authority under Title 49 of the D.C. Code and thus acted contrary to law in deploying the D.C. National Guard for non-military crime deterrence missions in the absence of a request from the city's civil authorities. And second, these defendants lack statutory authority under 32 U.S.C. Section 502, Section 32, to support their request for assistance from out-of-state National Guards and their actions in calling those guards to the district. The court ruled that the D.C. Guard couldn't be used for garden variety law enforcement activities without a request by the mayor, and the out-of-state guards could not be summoned here. That violated the defendant's legal responsibilities and exceeded it. The administration is appealing that order. That order came down 6 days before the assassination of these troops. The administration is appealing, as is their right. But I just want to say to the families, what we owe to you is a vigorous prosecution to the full extent of the law of the criminal who assassinated these two individuals, killing one and badly wounding the others, and badly wounding Staff Sergeant Wolf. But if this legal order is upheld, and these were unlawful missions, these individuals shouldn't have been here. They should have been celebrating Thanksgiving with their families at home rather than patrolling near Farragut Square in Washington. And if those legal orders are withheld, there's something additionally we owe these families in addition to the prosecution of the assassin. The civil officials responsible for an unlawful deployment will owe these families a deep, deep apology for the losses that they have suffered. The prosecution of the assassin is important, but responsibility and acceptance of responsibility from civil servants issuing illegal orders is also important. It's deeply important. I would encourage my colleagues to read this 61-page order that was issued. I think it's quite persuasive. We'll see how it stands up on appeal. But I had the deep feeling on the day that the sad news broke about the shooting that the two West Virginians should have been home with their families celebrating Thanksgiving that day rather than here on a mission of questionable legality. General Hugh, I want to ask you a question in my remaining seconds. You talked about the training that Guard members receive. What training do Guard members receive when they're deployed in these missions about dealing with folks who present with mental health issues? Local law enforcement receive very significant training on this topic. I wonder what training our National Guard members receive on this topic.
Senator, those that are deployed in Title 10 status receive two primary types of training before they're allowed to go on mission. The first is on the standing rules for the use of force to ensure that at first they learn how to de-escalate and then use any force as a last resort, but first non-deadly force before deadly force only when all lesser means have been attempted and failed and they're protecting themselves or the fellows.
I'm now over time, but is in either the two kinds of training that you were describing,
Yes, sir.
do these Guard members receive the critical training about dealing with folks with mental health instances? I spoke with Mayor Bowser the other day, and she talked about the fact that the Metro PD all receive significant mental health training because a significant percentage of the instances where they're interacting with folks who might be a danger to themselves or others are driven by mental health issues. It was her impression, and mine as a former mayor and governor, that that's not the kind of training that our National Guard members receive.
What is the answer to that, General?
Senator and Chairman, the answer is they do not receive specific training in that regard.
Thank you.
Senator Scott.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Thank each of you for being here and your decades of service to our country and our war fighters. I want to start today by recognizing Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, two heroes who were tragically attacked by a monster keeping our nation's capital safe. I also want to ask every American to keep Specialist Beckstrom family in their prayers as they deal with the pain of losing a child. As a parent and a grandparent, I can't imagine what that's like. And of course, all of our prayers go for a full recovery for Staff Sergeant Wolf. These are two heroes like all of our National Guardsmen, volunteered to keep our country safe and stepped up to clean up Democrat-run cities all around the country that were running rampant with soaring crime and lawlessness. We've seen record low crime in real results as people are finally comfortable living in their own homes again in places like Chicago, Memphis, and our nation's capital. Families in my state are finally comfortable coming to Washington, D.C. again because they feel safe. For each of you, can you just give me an example of how some of the work the Guard's done and what you're most proud of? Starting with you, General.
Senator, I'm proud of all of the Guard forces that have come under Title X command and control. Their discipline, their adherence to all policies, and their cooperation with local law enforcement and state law enforcement in each of the regions where they are employed, to me is very impressive. It's much appreciated from our standpoint, and I think it shows that they continue to be citizen soldiers even in Title X status.
Mr. Young.
Senator, as the former General Counsel for the National Guard Bureau with 20 years of service there, as well as service in the West Virginia Guard, first I would share your sympathies for the family of Special Spectrum and Staff Sergeant Wolf. I would say that I've seen the National Guard in my time, in my 20 years, having advised on National Guard issues, do exceptional things, everything from domestic emergency response and making sure our communities are safe, to helping us execute our Operation Midnight Hammer in a way that really could not have been done without a total team effort. And so the National Guard is always ready, it is always there, and every member of the National Guard that I've served with are exceptional professionals who are able and willing and ready to accomplish the mission whenever it presents.
Mr. Dillson.
Senator, it's an excellent question, and I'm most impressed with situations where governors have stepped up and taken the federal government's offer of doing Title 32 activations because of how they can help local law enforcement. The data speaks for itself. Serious crime rates in Memphis, for example, are down over 45% year to date, and I believe that's a direct reflection of the National Guardsmen at work there. There are similar numbers in D.C., and we're incredibly grateful to the over 10 states that have sent National Guardsmen to the city, including the D.C. National Guard, who are doing that great work. The results are impressive and speak for themselves.
Thank each of you. President Trump is clearly doing the right thing. He's focused on keeping our country safe, keeping our cities safe, and I'm very thankful that he's been willing to do this to make it safe for people to travel this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator King.
A large standing army in time of peace has ever been considered dangerous to the liberties of a country. George Washington. The founders of this country understood the dangers of a military presence within our borders. James Madison, a standing military force with an overgrown executive. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? An overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. Again, Madison at the Constitutional Convention, the means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny at home.
Do you have a mock-up?
Patrick Henry, a standing army we shall have also to execute the execrable commands of tyranny. Finally, Samuel Adams, a standing army, if it shall be established, will undoubtedly be permanent, and the people will become slaves. I want to sort of broaden this discussion from the specific to the more general. What concerns me about the cases we're talking about today is the normalization of deploying the military domestically. We've got laws about it, and you guys can thread the needle and talk about how this or that deployment is okay or not okay. But the idea of deploying federal troops into American cities, particularly against the wishes of the governor. Mr. Devilson, you said something that was borderline humorous. You said, we'll work closely with state and local governments. That didn't happen in Illinois or in California. So we're talking about a broader issue here that I think is extremely dangerous. And the reason it's particularly dangerous in the present moment is we have a president who has a very low bar as to what constitutes an emergency. I live in Maine. on the border of Canada. There is no emergency with Canada. And yet this president declared an emergency in order to impose tariffs on Canada, which is wrecking their economy. So the idea that we are saying that the president has the power to, in his own mind, decide what an emergency is and then deploy troops into our cities, I think is exceedingly dangerous. And the people who founded this country thought so too. So I think we can talk about the legality of a particular deployment here or there, but the principle is what's so dangerous, and the founders of this country understood that, and in many, many ways. For example, in the Constitution, the Army, we're only allowed to fund the Army for 2 years. That was for a purpose, in order to limit the whole idea of a standing army. We now have a standing army. We have an all-volunteer army. And then we have this quick reaction force, which has essentially become a special army on behalf of the president. And I'm not necessarily, I mean, I do criticize this president for his low standard of what constitutes an emergency, but this is a dangerous precedent for any president. And that's what concerns me about this, gentlemen. And Mr. Young, you're familiar with the concepts and the principles of the Constitution. Speak to the more general question that I'm raising, not the specifics of Washington or Los Angeles, but the idea of the normalization of use of troops in our streets, I think is extremely dangerous, and the founders of our country would I think, agree.
Thank you, Senator. I would just say that immediately after the passage of the Constitution, Congress passed a law that would delegate their authority to determine when the militia could be called forth, and they delegated that authority to the president. George Washington himself, whom you quoted, immediately put that to use. And George Washington mustered 13,000 militiamen and marched them to Pennsylvania to suppress what was...
Shays Rebellion.
Sir, it was the Whiskey Rebellion.
Whiskey Rebellion.
Right? The Shays Rebellion was in Massachusetts. Whiskey Rebellion is in Pennsylvania, where they tarred and feather tax collectors. And the president sent them there to protect federal functions and the officers who were performing their duty. Very similar to what was there. And that original statute, sir, it had a provision in it that a federal judge would need to make the determination that the laws were not being able to be enforced. And after George Washington moved the troops to Pennsylvania, Congress came back and amended that and took that out and put it within the discretion of the president. And it wasn't long after that that the Supreme Court reviewed that muster. The Supreme Court went in and reviewed an actual mobilization of the militia to deal with an exigent
So is there
circumstances.
no realistic check on the president? Can the president declare an emergency? And I think it's been testified here today, what's bothering everybody is this president keeps using the term the enemy within. And he's not talking about al-Qaeda, and he's not talking about the Russians, and he's not talking about the Chinese. We can't tell quite who he's talking about, but the use of the term the enemy within as a justification for deploying troops, maybe it's a question of judgment and what the standard is. And it just strikes me, I mean, you seem unconcerned about this, but...
Well, Senator, if I may, I think the Supreme Court has directly asked that question in the context of the president's ability to mobilize the militia. And if I may, I would answer by giving you some of the language of the Supreme Court. And it says, by whom is the emergency to be judged? Is the president the sole and exclusive judge as to whether an emergency has arisen? Or is it to be considered an open question which every officer may decide for himself, or contested by every militiaman who should refuse his order? The Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the authority to decide whether the emergency exists belongs exclusively to the president, and that his decision is conclusive on all other persons. And the Supreme Court again, in another Supreme Court decision, said, after the president has acted and called out the militia, is a circuit court of the United States authorized to inquire whether his decision was right? If the judicial power of the United States extends so far, then the guarantees in the Constitution are a guarantee of anarchy and not of order. And then lastly, with respect to whether or not there's a remedy, the Supreme Court recognized that there might be circumstances where this may be perceived to be abused. And it says, the law does not provide any appeal from the judgment of the president, and for any right in a subordinate officer to review or question his decision before they enforce it. It says such power may be abused, for there is no power for which is not susceptible of abuse, but the remedy for this, as well as for any other official misconduct, if it should occur, is to be found in the Constitution itself. And, sir, that's the Supreme Court's decision.
And what
on
is
this
that
issue.
remedy that's in the Constitution? Impeachment? Elections? What?
Elections. And I think one of the frequency of elections is one of the things in the Supreme Court decision of Mott, Martin v. Mott of 1847, is the one of the factors that the Supreme Court discussed as to a remedy when the people in this body may disagree with the president's determination that an exigency exists, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
What
Mr.
citation
Young,
was that,
could
Mr.
you, counsel behind us would like for you to state for the record what case you were quoting in answer to Senator King?
Yes, the language comes from Martin v. Mott, which is 12 Wheat, 1827, as well as In re Debs, and Luther v. Borden, which is at 48 U.S.C. 1847.
By the way, Counselor, the organization that you work for is the Department of Defense, 10 U.S.C. 111A. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for repeatedly making that point, Senator. Senator Sheehy.
Thank you, Chairman. I always find it interesting when constitutional scholars and law of the sea scholars parachute from the rafters during every Trump decision. But we're not a legal body, we're a political body. So if you want a legal body, there's one a block away of white marble. It's a beautiful building. We're a policy body, we're a political body. But just to set the record straight, to your knowledge, Mr. Young, has the president issued any illegal orders, or have illegal orders been followed in the course of the National Guard deployments to our southern border and our cities?
Senator, no, the president has not issued any illegal orders, and the Ninth Circuit has ruled in that favor.
Okay, so we've cleared that up, and there is a case under appeal, which, as Senator Kaine pointed out, is the administration's right to appeal a judgment that called one of the deployments illegal. So right now, no laws have been broken as far as we know. And General Guillot, as the commander of Northern Command, which consists of the entire continent, obviously the continental United States and Alaska included, we've been hearing about threats, we've been hearing about what constitutes an emergency and the president's authority to respond to such an emergency. As a military commander, what do you feel is a greater threat to our national security? 500 volunteers, trained National Guardsmen walking the streets of our cities, or 20 million illegal immigrants who've entered this country over the past 5 years?
Senator, the U.S. Northern Command is situated to, tasked to seal and repel at the border, as you mentioned, with the illegal activity. And I think the results are very strong and speak for themselves there. However, the other group that you mentioned, the 700 guardsmen that are in Title X status, are also doing an excellent job of protecting federal functions and facilities when they're allowed to by the court. Right now, that is just in California, and I think they're doing an exceptional job there in protecting the Roybal Federal Building as well.
And is the influence of transnational criminal organizations that fill our country with fentanyl, poison, various other drugs, illicit activity, human trafficking, is that a national security threat?
Yes, sir, it is. And as I said, I think we are responding to that very well in cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security.
So therefore, under a national security threat, which is unquestionably being fueled by foreign powers that do not want American values to succeed, co-opting transnational criminal organizations, they are actively attacking this country using illegal immigration, using transnational crime, and using drugs to do so. Would that be a correct statement?
It is, yes, sir.
So 70,000 Americans-ish a year are dying from fentanyl-related overdoses. are being trafficked, are being murdered and thrown under bridges by illegal immigrants and the criminal organizations related to those. That sounds like a pretty big emergency. You and I went to war for 20 plus years when 5,000 Americans were killed on and around 9/11. The number's much higher now as they've unfortunately died from mesothelioma and other sicknesses related to what happened on 9/11, our first responders and more. I think we're almost 7,000 now as those cancers have taken many lives. So we've settled the legal questions. What we're talking about is politics. What we're talking about is we're being told that 3 to 5 to 700, call the number whatever it is, honorable young Americans who've asked to join the military, raise their right hand, who are volunteering for these deployments, we're being told that them walking the streets, protecting Americans from being mugged, from being carjacked, like our congressmen are 2 blocks away from here. Like one of my staffers was clubbed over the head a few months ago in the ICU, woke up, stripped of all valuables. Apparently, these guardsmen on our street are a greater threat to this nation than the tens of millions of illegal immigrants that were welcomed to this country in the Biden administration. The Biden administration selectively opened our border. It was a choice. They made the choice to do that. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision that they made. And the Venezuelan boat drivers who want to bring poison to this country, they made a choice to get in that boat and drive it here. And we are making the choice, the American people made the choice last year that they're sick of it. They're tired of it, and they want an end to put to this disgusting policy that has led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So I think it's an absolute disgrace that we are impugning the integrity of our people in uniform, the integrity of this administration, and the will of the American people to live safely on their own streets. The Constitution says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American people have a right to expect their government will protect them from being murdered in the street. So I'm sick and tired of the constitutional lawyers parachuting out of the rafters every day when we are doing exactly what the American people asked us to do. If a legal order is given by the Supreme Court that this is wrong, I can promise you the administration will follow it. I hope they do, and I would expect them to. But thus far, a year into this administration, that hasn't happened, and the American people asked to be protected from these threats, and you're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sheehy. I recognize Senator Warren, and I have a markup across the street in the Rules Committee, and Senator Budd will preside during my absence.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by extending my condolences to the family of Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, who paid the ultimate sacrifice while deployed in D.C., and my thoughts are with Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf as he continues to fight for his life. And I want to make clear, nobody here is impugning the people who are on the streets. No one here is impugning the integrity of our National Guard. We're just asking about how they got put there by people in leadership positions. It's been 6 months since President Trump and Secretary Hegseth deployed the National Guard onto American streets. The investigation that I just released with several senators on this committee found that DoD has footed the bill for more than $2 billion in support of the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration Enforcement. That's money that was meant for military training facilities, crumbling military barracks, schools for military families, and instead, it was spent on deploying our National Guard to pick up trash in Washington, D.C., and deal with civilian protesters in other cities. So I think we are right to ask the question about how this happened. Mr. Young, you are one of the senior attorneys at DoD. You were the acting DoD General Counsel when the decision was first made to deploy the National Guard to Los Angeles. Now, if an attorney raises concerns about the legality of military operations, do you think the appropriate response is to tell them to shut up and get out of the way?
I'm sorry, Senator, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, if a JAG attorney raises concerns about the legality of a military operation, do you think the appropriate response is to tell them to shut up and get out of the way?
Senator, the law provides that military judge advocates are able to provide independent advice
That's right.
to military commanders, to the Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Secretary of the Army.
Right. And I'm asking you about the appropriate response. Do you think the appropriate response is to tell them to shut up and get out of the way?
Senator, I'm not aware of a response of that nature.
I'm asking you if you think that would be an appropriate response. It ought to be an easy yes or no question.
But by whom, Senator?
By you.
Senator, not that
Mr.
I'm aware
Young,
of.
there are disturbing reports that when the top uniformed attorney in the Army raised concerns about the legality of using National Guard soldiers and other DoD resources for immigration enforcement, you told him to stop meddling in state affairs, and then shortly after that, Secretary Hegseth fired the JAG officer with no explanation. Mr. Young, the report does not have a direct quote, but is it true that you said something along those lines?
Senator, the context of that is that the officer was wanting to comment on whether the state, in a state capacity, could provide personnel who were in a state status, not in a federal military status, not part of the Army, to help
your answer
assist.
is-
And so we have many missions, Senator, that are occurring on the border right now. We have 3,000 approximately
So
National
your
Guard
answer
personnel.
is to confirm that report, and that is what you said. Is that right?
That is not what I said.
So you're saying you didn't say that?
I did not say that.
Well, I'm glad you said you didn't say it, because this is not the only report of JAG being sidelined by this administration. And I'm glad you think it might be inappropriate for JAG to be sidelined. More recently, the senior JAG at Southcom was reportedly overruled when he objected that the boat strikes near Venezuela are extrajudicial killings. Look, these deployments are not just legally questionable, they come at an extreme cost. And they come at the cost of mounting billions of dollars and at reports that it hurts troops' morale. In fact, the first Trump administration discontinued military support to DHS at the border and detention facilities, citing both the cost and the fact that our troops were demoralized by being put in that position. So I think it's exactly right that we are raising these questions, and whether or not JAG is receiving the appropriate opportunity to weigh in on illegal orders. If you say you didn't say it, then I trust what that means is you don't intend to say it, and you do not intend to sideline JAG when they raise questions about legality. Do I have that right, Mr. Young?
Senator, it's been my experience, having been a judge advocate in both the Air Force and in the Army, with almost 30 years of judge advocate experience, that judge advocates are able to quickly and clearly communicate their concerns to leadership, and that leadership is very attentive to their concerns when they're raised, and they have the ability to provide that advice
Look,
independently.
I don't have concerns about the judge advocates. I have concerns about the leadership and whether or not they are being sidelined. And I take it what you're saying is they should not be sidelined. It is important for our troops that they not be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sullivan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses here. I also want to, like everybody else, keep the families and victims of this outrageous shooting of our National Guardsmen from West Virginia here in D.C. Just an outrage. I try to go running on the mall every morning, exercising. Whenever I see our National Guardsmen out there, I feel good about them. I always stop them. I thank them. I hope that's what everybody does. By the way, that incident should help spur, I hope, on both sides of the aisle. I have legislation called the Protect Our Heroes Act. I introduce it every year. A lot of Republican co-sponsors, no Democrat co-sponsors yet. It's a simple bill. It says if you try to purposely ambush and lure a first responder, law enforcement, National Guard, police, firefighter into a situation where you then attack them, kill them, that we will federalize that crime. We will make the penalties very high, and if you kill that person, you will get the death penalty. It's called Protect Our Heroes. And I would love it if some of my Democrat colleagues could come on board, because that is exactly what just happened to these young, brave National Guardmen. And the people who did it should get the death penalty when they kill someone. So let me go to you, Mr. Young. The legal framework and precedent of this, I think it's important in the history. You know, there's a lot of revisionist history going on. My first deployment as a U.S. Marine, I did
MUARG deployment to the Indo-PACOM region. I was based at Camp Pendleton. When I came back, my battalion was a 6-month deployment, and then half the battalion was ordered by the president, it was President Clinton, I've been around a while, to go to the southern border, and the other part of the battalion was sent to the Umatilla National Forest to go fight forest fires, because it was a really big forest fire season, and the forest fire capability of the United States was tapped out. So they called up the Marines. So we've been doing this for a long time, including a deployment to the border, to secure the border. In the mid-90s, that's when my Marine Corps battalion, active duty battalion, did it. There was no demoralized feelings there. I don't know where the hell Senator Warren gets that. We were motivated Marines. President of the United States told us to go different places, and we went. That's what you do in the military. So can you give me a little sense of the legal framework and the precedent of these kind of National Guard deployments, Mr. Young? It's not the first time we've done this, right?
No, Senator, it's not. And the border mission, as you stated, has been long enduring. And
decades, right?
That's right.
Democrats, Republicans have ordered our active duty
Democrats and
forces
Republicans, yes,
to
Senator.
the border to secure the border.
Yes, sir.
Bill Clinton did it when I was an active duty
Yes,
Marine.
and they've been doing it in various duty statuses, whether it be non-federalized in Title 32, where governors would send troops to the border, in a collaborative sense, also in Title 10, under differing administrations. Sir.
There's a
So-
legal basis and legal precedent that extends decades with Republican and Democrat administrations, correct?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay, let me turn to you, General Guillot. I think you're doing a great job there. You've seen this chart many times. My state's a busy place, right? We get incursions from the Russians and Chinese all the time. Another one, thanks for giving me a heads up right before Thanksgiving, including joint Russian-Chinese strategic bomber task forces, naval task forces, and our EEZ. But I wanted to ask you, particularly, General, the role of the National Guard in these operations, because these are frontline operations going directly against our adversaries, wing to wing, when our fighters go intercept Russian Bear bombers and MiGs that are armed. Dangerous work. We do it all the time up in Alaska. How critical is the National Guard in those missions?
Senator, the National Guard is essential in those missions.
Indispensable, aren't they?
Absolutely. I say frequently that the success of NORAD and NORTHCOM starts and stops with our relationship with the National Guard. To answer your question specifically, in Alaska, we have the 49th Missile Defense Brigade Battalion at
The
Fort
Missile
Greely.
Defense Unit that's protecting the entire United States of America right now as we speak.
From ICBM attack, yes, sir.
Correct, is National Guard unit.
That's right. Entirely National Guard there at Fort Greely. Also, as you mentioned, the air defense is run by 14 different National Guard wings for fighters, 6 National Guard wings for refuelers, including 1 in Alaska, and as well as an air defense squadron in Alaska that works side by side with the active duty forces to conduct the intercepts that you mentioned.
Let me ask one final quick question for you, General. You have to make the balance between kind of state-related National Guard missions and national issues, I would say, intercepting Russian Bear bombers and tanking the fighters that go do that is certainly a national mission. It matters to Alaska, it matters to the country. How do you balance that? I want to compliment again the National Guard, the Coast Guard on this big typhoon that hit Western Alaska. It didn't make a lot of press out here. 51 rescue missions, saved 51 lives. Unfortunately, we lost a couple Alaskans in those brutal storms, but that was kind of a state-specific example. How do you make the balance on the National Guard's missions when you have national and state-related missions?
So the way we do it is we have constant and steady relationships with the tags to let them know that federal forces are available if needed to complement the initial response in the state. In the case that you just mentioned, I think the response by the Alaska National Guard was phenomenal, and they did not require any federal assistance. But through NORTHCOM, we contact your tag and tags all across the country to make sure they know that we are ready with Title 10 assistance if needed.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peters, you are recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here and your testimony.
Just wanted to put out, first off, I think we all agree here, and everybody in this room, is that keeping the American public safe and fighting crime and making sure folks feel secure in their communities is absolutely fundamental to government. I would say it's probably the primary role of government is to keep people safe, first and foremost, so that we all agree. But then the second question is, how do we do that in the most effective way? How do we actually reduce crime? How do we make sure people are safe, and how do we spend scarce taxpayer money as wisely as possible? That's how I approach problems. So I had my Homeland Security staff, who I'm serve as ranking member, kind of look at the cost. And based on information we've gotten from the administration, National Guard deployments to American cities by this administration have cost taxpayers a little over $410 million so far, with the stated mission of restoring law and order and reducing crime. The federal government, however, as I think you know, already has some really effective ways of bolstering public safety now, such as the Department of Justice COPS hiring program, which puts highly trained, professional, full-time police officers in the community, helping those communities in particular that need additional law enforcement help. It funds local agencies to hire career law enforcement officers. Last year, in fact, the COPS program funded the hiring and training of 1,193 fully trained professional police officers nationwide at a cost of $157 million. So if we just do a bit of back-of-the-napkin math, the $410 million spent over the past 4 months of Guard deployments, if annualized, we would be able to hire 9,366 local trained police officers who know their communities, have local trust, and are often part of the community. They live there as well. So, Mr. DeLivson, given these numbers, do you agree that spending these funds on career law enforcement officers would be much more effective use of taxpayer money than a temporary employment of National Guard folks?
Senator, thank you for the question. And you make a great point as far as the difference in cost, but I would counter that by saying in exigent circumstances where we need to move fast, where things are not standard or normal, the National Guard is the response force that needs to be utilized in those situations. We look at Los Angeles and the rioting that was occurring out there. President Trump had to take action in that situation and mobilize the National Guard to help our partners in federal law enforcement respond to the vicious attacks that were happening on those officials. And so in those scenarios, it makes a lot more sense for National Guardsmen to deploy. Additionally, in areas where we are able to work with state governments, such as the state of Tennessee, we've been able to help dramatically reduce the overall crime rates in that city. And we are constantly reassessing the situation on the ground. If we are able to get crime rates down, where local law enforcement can handle these issues once again without additional federal support, there's nothing more that we'd like to do than to end these deployments. But with normalization of criminal activity, the president has jumped at this opportunity and led to make sure that we are a nation of law and order.
Well, let me reiterate. If you talked about putting those troops in the short run, that governors and mayors who actually are on the ground, those are their cities, those are their folks, didn't believe that support was necessary, that and in fact it only increased tensions in those communities. That's not a long-term solution, and we should probably be immediately deploying things like COPS grants to help folks. In fact, just which I thought was interesting in how this is so inefficient, in response to written questions from my staff, the DC National Guard confirmed that 38 of their service members, who are Metropolitan Police Department officers, 10 of them were called up for the, or I should say, 38 of them are service members, 10 of them are supporting DC Safe, Beautiful Task Force and are not serving their day jobs as police officers. So they've been basically taken off the streets as DC trained police officers, and they're doing things like painting fences, picking up trash, with the DC National Guard? Why would you take trained police officers off the street in Washington, DC, call them up for the guard and say, now you can help beautify the city instead of being on the street fighting crime? Does that make any sense?
It's a good question, Senator, but I would posit two things. First off, there are different missions for the DC deployment. There are presence patrols that are taking place constantly to make sure that people feel safe and secure.
These folks weren't doing that. For what we understand, they were doing the beautification mission.
Senator, I can't speak to the specifics on that, but in addition to that, oftentimes local law enforcement are also National Guardsmen, and that only helps our National Guard.
I agree, but they should be doing law enforcement work, not picking up trash. I mean, these are the kinds of things that just how inefficient. We got to be efficient. Taxpayer money is sacred. We have to protect our communities, but let's do it in a smart way. Let's not do it in a way that may make TV news. Let's do it in a way that actually helps people on the ground and keeps them safe.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Schmidt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just point out that I do think that it's important to understand why we're here, like the context. The fact of the matter is that the excusing of violence and this unlawful behavior by rioters and folks who seek to do harm against our law enforcement across this country has metastasized. And you don't have to go back into ancient history. You look in the summer of love of 2020, when Democrat mayors and Democrat governors sat idly by while bricks were dropped off when the sun went down and buildings burned. Law enforcement officers were shot, they were spit at. And you know what the Democrat response was? We hear you. Yes, we should defund the police. Now, my friends on the other side, they want to sort of memory hole that. But you could run a tail of the tape about elected Democrats who spouted this nonsense. So when we talk about having local solutions, the fact of the matter is, I was Attorney General at the time, a lot of law enforcement folks, they just left. Police officers took early retirement. So you're not going to just magically create this group of local law enforcement folks to take on violent crime. I think the pendulum is starting to swing back. But I want to talk about sort of two different scenarios. You've got sort of the DC scenario, then you have the LA sort of Portland scenario, where Antifa in particular, which has now thankfully been designated not only as a domestic terrorist organization, but a foreign terrorist organization because of their tactics. The fact is, this is a network, decentralized, that has safe houses and financing across the world, including the United States, who wants to do harm to ICE agents. And so what I don't hear a lot from my Democrat colleagues, they might condemn the violence. But what's telling is you don't hear any of them say, stand back and let ICE do their jobs. Because the fact is, they just don't actually believe in immigration enforcement. They think that everybody has a right to be here and no one should ever have to go home. Borders don't really matter. And so the villainizing of our law enforcement agents, especially ICE, is really destructive in leading this, which then brings us to today, which is why the National Guard has been deployed in places like Los Angeles and in Oregon. And it's not unprecedented. The most obvious example people will also remember is other Democrats, including the Democrat governor of Arkansas, who didn't want black kids to go to school with white kids. President Eisenhower then not only deployed the National Guard, but sent the 101st Airborne in. So let's not pretend that this is some constitutional crisis. The President of the United States has very clear authority to send them to protect federal buildings and to protect the law enforcement, which is all that's happening. So I want to ask, General, maybe for you or anyone actually, what are some of the tactics that are being used right now by these thugs on the streets, these criminals who are seeking to entice federal agents out with firecrackers or whatever it is so that they can actually take shots at them, so they can assault them? Because I think it's important for the American people to understand what's actually happening, the violence that they're being subjected to. I mean, we just saw yesterday a National Guardsman being harassed by some clown on the street for doing his job protecting people. So what are some of the tactics that are being used that are really dangerous for law enforcement right now?
Senator, you just described many of the tactics that were being used when Title X forces were directed into Los Angeles to protect federal activities, to include ICE conduct of their duties. Also, in other cities, however, with court orders, our forces have not been on mission there to work in conjunction with the lead agencies like they have in California.
I think you've seen, there's no coincidence here, you've seen 1,000% increase in assaults on ICE officers. So to my Democrat colleagues who want to have this hearing, we got to be honest about what's actually happening out there. This rhetoric is making it open season on law enforcement, and it's incredibly dangerous. So when we villainize ICE agents who have family members, who are husbands, who are mothers, who are simply enforcing the laws that this Congress, or not this Congress, but Congress has passed over the years, this is insane. And the condoning of people blocking off vehicles from, enforcing the law, these ICE agents, this is a powder keg. It's a powder keg. So I'm very thankful for the men and women who are serving this country, who are protecting those agents, who are protecting federal assets. And the president's well within his authority to do it. Thank God we're challenging some of the assumptions that have existed for so long that people, particularly minorities, have to live in these crime-ridden areas forever. It doesn't need to be that way. They don't deserve to have to sweep up glass every Sunday morning or have a loved one that's shot. We don't have to accept that anymore. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Duckworth, you are recognized.
Thank you. So there was no rioting in Chicago before ICE was sent in. And for the past 2 months, Illinoisans have seen DHS federal agents abusing our communities. President Trump wanted to put our troops in the middle of it. The courts have stopped him so far, and the courts are finding again and again that there is no legal reason for what he is doing. But in his ideal world, Trump wants our professional military to defend unprofessional and abusive federal law enforcement agents. So let me tell you what is happening in Chicago. It is not ICE agents that are being attacked. ICE agents are the ones who tear gas over 24 Chicago police officers. ICE agents are the ones who tear gas toddlers. They are the ones pointing loaded weapons at unarmed bystanders, hauling preschool teachers from daycare in front of their kids, and rappelling from DHS helicopters onto apartment buildings in the dead of night to rip families from their beds and detain them for hours, and then when they go to court, had to admit that they have no basis to file any charges against those people they ripped out of that building in the middle of the night. That is the terror that is happening in Chicago. It is not ICE agents as the victims. It is the civilians of Chicago who are the victims of the ICE agents. Trump claimed that these federal agents need protection. The same agents that a federal judge found repeatedly used excessive force against civilians and lied about it in court because we showed up with footage of them abusing civilians. Trump was ready to throw troops onto the streets of Chicago to protect these violent agents under a vague and unprecedented mission with little realistic guidance for what their experience would actually be like on the ground and the complex decisions that they will face. So let's play this out. What are our troops tasked with the mission to protect federal agents supposed to do if they witness an agent throw a child to the ground, like has happened in Chicago? Do our troops intervene and pull the agent off that child, or do they stand by and do nothing? Trump is forcing our military men and women to make a horrible choice, uphold their loyalty to the Constitution and protect peaceful protesters, or execute questionable orders from the president. Mr. Young, will the department commit to provide legal protection to any Title X service member who intervenes to stop a federal agent from wrongfully harming a civilian? Easy question, yes or no?
Senator, are you asking if the department will defend them? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, with the Department of Defense.
Generally, in those circumstances, Senator, it's the Department of Justice that would provide representation, not necessarily the Department of Defense.
So you're saying the Department of Defense would not commit to providing legal protection to any Title X service members who intervenes to stop a federal agent from wrongfully harming a civilian?
That's not what I said, Senator. What I said is the Department of Justice is the one who provides the representation.
What will the Department of Defense do?
The Department of Defense makes recommendations based on the facts and circumstances of each event as it occurs. That's part of a package that
So you're
goes
not
to the
committing.
US. I'm sorry?
You're not committing to support our troops who are under Title X who intervenes to stop a federal agent from wrongfully harming a civilian?
Senator, the presumption is that our troops will act lawfully, and so therefore we would normally work with a troop to
Okay,
help
listen,
make
this
a
is a straightforward
recommendation to the
answer.
Department of
And the
Justice.
fact that it isn't to you is deeply concerning to me. Federal law enforcement agents actually have a legal duty to intervene to prevent a fellow officer from using excessive force. Uniformed service members, on the other hand, have no comparable obligations nor accompanying legal protection if they decide to intervene against a federal agent to protect a civilian. They do so at their own risk. Our troops could be dragged into court and would be on their own to plead their case to a jury, all because their commander-in-chief put them in an unprecedented situation that they don't regularly train for. And if that service member decides not to intervene, what will Americans think when they see someone in uniform who they were taught served and protected them, standing by as a child, is harmed by one of Trump's abusive DHS agents, as has happened in Chicago? I fear the day when Americans stop thanking our troops for their service because they're afraid of our troops. We know that this administration is trying to borrow the respected image of the military. Across the country, we've seen DHS agents dressing in camouflage and wielding military-style weapons. They're making it hard for Americans to tell the difference between abusive federal agents and professional troops. General Guillot, what guidance or assurances have you received from DHS or DoD about distinguishing DHS personnel from the military when they're operating in close proximity to one another? And what are you prepared to do to help make that distinction?
Senator, I have not received any guidance or direction to do anything within my authority, though. I can order distinguishing markings on a uniform or, for instance, replace the name with the last letter or the first letter of the last name and a numerical designator to ensure that we're protecting the military members and we're able to distinguish them from others.
If we fail to draw a bright line between our highly trained troops and lawless federal agents, who, by the way, shot a priest in the head with purple ball after he prayed for them, and they were up on a 3-story building, he raised his hand, prayed for them, turned around, and then they shot him in the head. There was no riot there. He was praying for them. If we fail to draw a bright line between our highly trained troops and lawless federal agents, I fear our public's trust in our military may never recover.
Thank you, Senator.
You're back.
Recognize myself for 5 minutes. And thank you all for being here today, and thank you for your willingness to serve our country. I just want to highlight how important it is for Americans to know that that we are looking after them and that we've got their back. You know, deploying National Guard, it would not be necessary, and I think you pointed this out, but it would not be necessary if state and local officials were helping get criminal, illegal aliens, and violent repeat offenders off the streets. But the problem had metastasized, and President Trump needed to step in. So thank you all for what you're doing. You know, my colleagues across the aisle, they like to talk about the importance of the rule of law, but unfortunately not when it comes to enforcing immigration or criminal law. So I think we should be thankful each and every day for our men and women in uniform who put themselves in harm's way to keep Americans safe. You know, some elected Democrats have even made the dangerous claim that it was the National Guard's very presence that led to the murder of Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and the wounding of Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf. I think that's really irresponsible. So let's be clear. A deranged terrorist targeted members of our military who were simply carrying out their mission to keep Americans safe. And they weren't attacked because of President Trump or Operation Make DC Safe and Beautiful or anything that service members themselves had done. You know, we mourn Specialist Beckstrom's loss, and we pray for the healing of Staff Sergeant Wolf. And I want to thank the West Virginia National Guard for their service to our country. And it's really special to me. My wife's family is from West Virginia. My wife's from West Virginia and from Berkeley County, home of Martinsburg. And before Martinsburg, many years ago, they were from Webster County, the 2 counties in West Virginia that were affected. So this is personal. And in small communities, most families know each other one degree away. So our prayers are with them, and we're grateful for them. Let me read off a few statistics from the DC deployment here. The National Guard has rendered medical assistance 136 times here in DC. They found 12 lost children. They've stopped 86 physical alterations. They've administered Narcan 27 times. 27 times a service member has given life-saving treatment to prevent an opioid overdose. I don't know how anyone can actually be against this assistance to local law enforcement. You know, maybe it's the same way the left has now become the pro-cartel, pro-drug boat party. I don't get it. I mean, these are my friends over there. I don't understand it. But my only question for you, Mr. Ditlevson, is I know that crime has gone down here in D.C., objectively, as well as in Memphis. Can you talk about the differences compared to deployments in other cities, and what's driving the factor in what's the driving factor in bringing the crime down? What are you all doing to bring crime down? And are there approaches from local law enforcement that you've noticed that have really helped bring about some favorable outcomes?
Senator, thank you for the question. The distinguishing difference in those two situations versus the other deployments is the willingness of governors to step up and ask for help from the federal government. That Title 32 status allows National Guardsmen to do much more than they would be in a Title 10 status in a strictly defensive posture, protecting federal law enforcement, federal property. And it's important to note because in the cases of Oregon and Illinois, Secretary Hegseth offered Governor Kotek and Governor Pritzker, respectively, the support of the federal government to help fund a Title 32 deployment in Portland and Chicago, and that offer was rejected by those governors. And President Trump, as Commander-in-Chief, fulfilling his campaign promises of restoring law and order in this country, led on that issue, federalized troops, and sent them to those cities to protect American citizens, because all American citizens, regardless of whether they live in a red area or blue area, they deserve the right to be able to walk in their cities safely and securely.
Well, thank you for that. And again, thank you for your service. You know, it seemed it's the issue of who's offering the support. And American people overwhelmingly elected President Trump. And we've heard the statement, if he cured cancer, they wouldn't want to take the medicine. Some people wouldn't. But he's bringing down crime. He's offering help to states and communities because he just wants to help the American people, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful, again, for your service, so thank you. Senator Kelly, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also express my condolences to Sarah Beckstrom's family and to the family, and also to Andrew Wolf. I understand, personally how, hard it is to recover from those kind of injuries. And to my good friend, Senator Budd across the aisle, I don't think there's nobody on this committee that is pro-cartel and pro-drug boat, or in this Congress. General Guillot, Americans deserve to feel safe in their communities. As the son of two cops, I understand the sacrifice and the hard work it takes to do that job. That's why I know we've got to do more to support law enforcement, especially local law enforcement, those professionals who do that difficult job every single day. I also recognize that not every challenge faced in our cities should default to a military response. On September 30th, President Trump addressed military leadership, both senior officers, admirals and generals, and senior enlisted at Quantico about the deployments of National Guard to U.S. cities. And at that address, he said, and I quote, "I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military National Guard," unquote. So General Guillot, is there an established DoD policy that authorizes using civilian communities as training grounds and American citizens as training tools?
No, Senator, there is not.
Is there any precedent in DoD history for conducting combat-oriented training in American communities?
No, Senator.
And have you been consulted at all about using any specific cities for training?
Senator, I have not been consulted nor directed to use any American cities for training.
And has any federal official asked you to plan training operations in U.S. cities?
No, sir, not training.
And has NORTHCOM ever designated an American city
as a training ground?
No, sir.
Thank you for that. If U.S. cities are training grounds, so based on what the president had said and indicated he wanted the Secretary of Defense to consider doing, then how are the service members in this scenario expected to perceive the civilian population in that environment?
Senator, I can tell you that for the areas that are under Title X control, we provide very clear training and reinforce that with daily meetings on what our purpose is there, and that is to protect federal buildings. It is not for any other function.
But if you carried out the president's objective of using a city for training, does this imply that civilians could be used as potential adversaries?
Senator, I'm very confident that that is not a factor within my chain of command because of the very clear guidance and direction that we give on what the mission is and what our proper response to any activities there, which includes de-escalation as the first step in the standing rules for the use of force.
So what do you think the president meant by that statement?
Sir, I haven't thought into what he might have meant. I listened to it at the time, and since then have only gone on what has been directly tasked to us and then what my authorities and responsibilities are.
Would it ever be okay to regard U.S. citizens as adversaries or enemies?
Well, sir, that's a hypothetical. Our initial response is no. Now, of course, there could be illegal activity that's underway, and we may have the authority, vested in us to respond in accordance with the authorities that we have. But again, these are like double and triple hypotheticals.
I don't mean it as a hypothetical. And even if there was illegal activity, could be viewed that that person is a criminal. I'm asking specifically, is it okay to regard U.S. citizens as enemies?
No, sir.
Well, thank you.
We defend the United States and U.S. citizens. We do not view them as enemies.
I agree with you. My concern is, that labeling a city as a training ground inherently puts civilians in a position of being an adversary or an enemy. So I appreciate your response. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Slotkin, you're recognized.
Thank you. And I join the rest of my colleagues in recognizing the 2 West Virginia guardsmen who were shot in one fatal shooting, and thank them and their families for what they've done. I guess, my questions are for you, Mr. Young. You're the #2 lawyer at the Department of Defense. You've come before this committee before. A couple of weeks ago, a couple of us here on this committee and others put out a video talking about unlawful orders because we were getting so many people in uniform coming to us and saying, I just don't know if I'm going to be asked to do something that is illegal. I don't know how to handle that. Do you believe that any president can issue illegal orders? Is it possible for a president of the United States to issue illegal orders that the U.S. military should reject?
Senator, that's theoretically possible.
Okay. And, I think in the past, then Major Hegseth in 2016 said that the military has a responsibility to reject illegal orders. Attorney General Bondi last year wrote that military officers are required not to carry out unlawful orders. Can you give me an example of what would be an unlawful order of any kind?
Senator, I would say that the oath that this Congress has prescribed in 10
Just an
U.S.C.
example.
502
Just an example, like we've prosecuted people, right, for carrying out illegal orders. So what tell me is there, just
In
give
that
me
example,
any example.
Senator, the one that would come to mind would be the My Lai massacre from
Okay.
where a young platoon leader issued that it was not the President of the United States. As long as an order is not patently and facially illegal, it is presumed to be lawful, and service members are obligated to follow
Understood.
it without having to consult with the judge.
And I think the
advocate, and
conversation that we were starting was not because we don't trust the military. If anything, I mean, I've worked alongside the military my entire life as a CIA officer. It's that the decision makers and the words coming out of the mouth of the commander-in-chief using our cities as, quote, training grounds, those are the things. Going after, quote, the enemy within does not give us confidence that this president is going to always use the military in an apolitical way that's exclusively meant on protecting the United States. Now, you said earlier that, and rightfully so, that the National Guard, of course, if they're doing missions like helping to clean up from an ice storm in Michigan, I don't think anyone questions the typical way that we use the National Guard. But for these folks who are deployed against the wishes of the sitting governor and the people of that state, you said that the troops are there to protect federal personnel, functions, and property, right? So people or functions or buildings. If you were asked to approve the placement of uniformed military on and around polling locations for a federal election in 2026, what would your legal judgment be of whether those uniforms could do that?
Senator, again, that's a hypothetical situation. There are federal laws that prohibit the stationing of troops at polling places. However, right, the question would be whether or not the degree to which that would apply in a non-federalized status under Title 32, and it would depend on the status of the personnel and the mission parameters that are being contemplated.
So it's possible that if you were asked, if you said, look, we've got a problem in Chicago, right? We've talked about federal troops in Chicago. We need to put uniformed military surrounding polling locations in downtown Chicago. Are there circumstances in which you would approve that?
Senator, I would say this, is that during COVID, when many poll workers were unavailable, many state and local jurisdictions
But you can understand, I understand during
National Guard
COVID, but
personnel there.
you can understand that when there's a trust deficit, right? When the President of the United States says we have to go after the enemy within, and that if he loses an election, it's because it was rigged, his words, that the idea that we put uniformed military surrounding polling locations, for you to not understand what that means to the American public, the playbook of authoritarianism that I've seen as a CIA officer play out over and over and over again in other countries, for you not to understand that that sends a shiver down the spine of every American, and should, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, that's why there's a trust deficit, is because there are some circumstances in which you would use the military in the middle of our democracy like that. And I continue to believe it's not our uniformed military that have a problem, it's the leaders who are directing them and these missions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rosen, you're recognized.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Chairman Wicker and Ranking Member Reed for holding this hearing. And like the rest of my colleagues and all Americans, my heart breaks for the murder of Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and the shooting of Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, who is thankfully recovering. My deepest condolences go out to their families, to the members of the West Virginia National Guard. And there's no question that American cities like Washington, D.C. face real public safety challenges. We need to tackle those directly by supporting and investing in local law enforcement. We need to strengthen community policing strategies. We need to address the root causes that drive crime. And sending the National Guard into communities, as my colleagues have suggested, is not a long-term solution or any solution to crime in our cities. It's a show of force that removes our guardsmen from the essential missions that they perform at home, like the Nevada Air National Guard's 151st Airlift Wing, which flies the very dangerous C-130 mission of fighting wildfires throughout the mountains of western United States. It also unfairly erodes the National Guard's standing with the American people. It needlessly puts guardsmen in harm's way without the legal means to effectively police American streets. It places our men and women in uniform in deeply fraught situations in their own home communities, particularly in states like Nevada with large Latino and immigrant populations, communities which members of the National Guard also hail from, sometimes even coming from mixed status families themselves. Deploying guardsmen along ICE raises real concerns about trust and community safety. We cannot ask our guardsmen to shoulder missions that strain their relationship with the communities that they proudly serve. So my priority is ensuring that our guardsmen and women can continue carrying out the mission sets that matter most to their states, including Nevada, all of our states, where our communities depend heavily on their support. That's why I want to understand exactly what guardsmen across from the United States are being pulled from, and whether the department has taken steps to mitigate the strain these deployments impose back home. So I'm going to talk about alternate missions. So General Guillot, can you outline what mission guardsmen were pulled from in their home states, and have any Guard units been pulled from time-sensitive missions, such as wildfire response, medical evacuation support, cyber defense teams, and scheduled annual training?
Senator, the Guard units that were activated to federal status in support of operations in California, Oregon, and Chicago were selected by the tags of those states when we presented the tasking to them. The units that were actually selected to fill those roles were selected by the
So you're saying
tag.
there was an option given to what states would be deployed, and those tags are the ones who made the decision? That's what you just said.
No, what I said is once the task came to that state, we consulted with the tags to determine who in that state would fill the tasking.
So
they
did you provide any backfill support to the governors of these affected states or those home state missions that are going unmet?
No, ma'am.
No backfill support?
No, we don't have forces to provide backfill, ma'am. We were tasked to fill. The states were tasked with the order, and then what I'm explaining is that we worked with the tags to make sure they picked the best units for that mission from within their state.
Have the governors of these states raised concerns about losing their personnel during peak operational periods? And if so, can you share with us those concerns?
Ma'am, I have not received any concerns.
Okay. Mr. Divelson, can you walk us through how the department weighed federal deployment demands against state-level mission requirements before deciding to move these personnel, please?
Absolutely, Senator. In the department, as the coordinating lead for these particular mobilizations, we consult with the National Guard Bureau, the Joint Staff, we speak with OGC, we speak with the Comptroller, and we make sure that we are balancing all of those different needs to provide the best advice to the Secretary in how these troops are mobilized.
Thank you. So I have just a few seconds left. So General, I'm going to go back to you. I want to know, from your perspective, are guardsmen being placed in situations where they're working in close proximity to ICE or otherwise involved in sensitive community interactions, and what guidance has been given to avoid eroding trust in diverse communities, as my esteemed colleague deferred to? And what is the division of mission responsibilities between DoD and ICE? Thank you.
Senator, the difference between the duties of ICE and the Title X forces is extreme. The Title X forces are only there to protect the federal facilities. Sometimes it's an ICE building, but in other cases it's Los Angeles that is not. It's a federal building.
I've seen them just walking around parks in my neighborhood here in D.C., so there are no federal buildings around where my apartment is.
Senator, I have to make the distinction there. I'm only responsible for the forces that are under Title X authorities, which are in Los Angeles, Oregon, Chicago, and at Fort Bliss. I do not have any command and control over the forces in Memphis or here in D.C.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Senator. I believe Ranking Member Reed has additional questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up, Mr. Divelson. You told me at the beginning of the hearing that the National Guard Quick Reaction Force already existed, but I understand that's not accurate, that the Secretary of Defense ordered the establishment of this national QRF on September 27th of this year. Not only that, he ordered that they be trained for specifically, and I quote, civil disturbance and law enforcement missions, and to be available for immediate nationwide deployment, ready to deploy within 8 hours, 12 hours, and 24 hours notice with weapons. Can you clarify your earlier answer?
Mr. Ranking Member, thank you for the opportunity to clarify the statement from before. The Secretary ordered the establishment of a new unit. You are correct in that. However, it is an old unit that will be repurposed to create that new unit. The National Guard Bureau refers to that as the HERF-DERF, Homeland Response Force and Domestic Response Force. And so we are repurposing something that already exists to create that newly established unit.
Now, the Secretary explicitly directed this QRF to be used for law enforcement. How would that be allowable under Posse Comitatus and the Title X authorities?
Senator, if I may, that is probably in the legal lane, and I have some background on the way in which these forces have been used historically and mustered within the states, having been the General Counsel of the National Guard Bureau. Many states, every state generally, will have an element of their force that they identify to be on a more ready recall notice. And so some states that may be 50 people, some states it's 700 people. Those forces are the ones that will be able to muster to their location quickly. And technically when they come in that status, sir, they would be non-federalized, and therefore the Posse Comitatus Act would not apply to them.
So you're saying that these forces would not be mobilized on a Title X mission?
Senator, what I'm saying is that if needed, the primary usage of these will be domestic within the state itself. They could also be used in other states if another state requested under what is called an emergency management compact request. It's called the EMAC, where one state requests another state to assist them in an emergency. They may be used in a non-federalized status. They would also be trained and ready in the event that they needed to be mobilized for a Title X purpose. That's a potential, sir.
Why are they being trained for law enforcement?
Well, sir, historically, after the events of Kent State back in the 70s, the Army and its wanted to make sure that all National Guard personnel received training in domestic law enforcement and civil disturbance operations. And so that's been a longstanding requirement for military forces, Senator.
General, do you train the National Guard or urge them to train in law enforcement activities other than military police activities?
Senator, when they come to Title X status, we do not train them for law enforcement. We train them in the Federal Protection Mission and with the standing rules for the use of force.
So the Secretary's order contradicts the current practice, which Title X personnel are not trained for law enforcement.
Sir, as I understand it, these National Guard members would be trained to do law enforcement activities if they are employed in their state active duty or in their Title 32 role, well knowing that if they're put in Title 10 role, that we would make it very clear that they are not allowed to execute any of those authorities, those activities that they've been trained to while they're conducting Title 10 missions.
Could you just clarify under Title 32, what role would a state governor have?
They would be under the state governor's control.
So
Title 32 status, sir.
Title II. So you would have to have the permission of the state governor to deploy these quick reaction forces in a law enforcement capacity under Title 32.
Yes, sir. And by that distinction, I would not be deploying them. They would not be under my command and control.
Well, it's interesting that we now have a small group in the National Guard that are being trained not only in civil disturbance but in law enforcement. that are being deployed, that will be able to deploy within 8 hours, some of them, with weapons. So you're telling me, though, Mr. Young, that the Secretary of Defense could not, or the President could not deploy them in a law enforcement capacity unless the governor agreed. Is that correct?
Sir, no, that's not necessarily correct, right? The authority under which the president can mobilize National Guard personnel to be able to perform federal law enforcement functions and to enforce the law is technically 12406, which does not require the consent of the governor. One last piece, Senator, that may be helpful is that this training and this construct of having a readily mobilized and well-trained cadre of National Guard personnel who are well-trained with interacting with the civilian populace is nothing new. We did it in 2020 when we had 40,000 National Guard personnel in the streets all over the country. There was a similar quick reaction force. It was stood up. We used it essentially from July of 2020 through approximately January of 2021.
And that was for law enforcement?
Senator, they were trained for law, as my understanding, but that's 5 years ago, and I don't have the documents in front of me.
That was and the cause of that deployment was what, Mr. Young? What prompted that deployment?
Well, Senator, I don't know that any of them were deployed. The need for them to be deployable was that there were protests going on around in every major city, and we had, at that time, 40,000 National Guard personnel deployed, and when they were deploying, it was federal officials were reticent to use active component troops, and they only wanted to use National Guard personnel who had military police training, and there's only so many of them. And so as a result, because we had 40,000 of them on the street, there was a need, Senator, to make sure that they had received additional forces.
If I may, I know where I'm going over time.
Ranking Member, I'd like to conclude that and recognize Senator Duckworth for one remaining questions, and after that, we'll conclude. Any additional questions we'll ask to be questions for the record, please.
Thank
Senator
you, Mr.
Duckworth.
Yes, thank you. So let me clarify. Mr. Dorfelson, can you commit right now that the mission of any deployment of active duty or National Guard troops domestically will never expand beyond the protection of federal buildings and federal law enforcement agents? Because in Illinois, you have Texas National Guardsmen deployed to Illinois against our governor's wishes. So if following up on the previous conversation that they would never be allowed to do law enforcement under Title 10, are we saying that there will never be a time in the future where Texas National Guardsmen will be sent to Illinois to do law enforcement? I'm confused as to how this is going to happen. So will National Guard troops domestically ever be told to carry out a mission beyond protection of federal buildings and federal law enforcement agents in any state, such as has happened in Illinois, where Texas National Guardsmen were sent to Illinois, forced down our throats?
Yeah. Senator, based on what Mr. Young just went through, I can't commit to that. I think Mr. Young could go into the specifics of the legal reason why that's the case. But in the Title 10 status, as a federal troop, the president has the authority to move them into another state, such as the
Where
Texas
they will,
National
then
Guard.
you're saying that you can't commit that those troops under Title 10 orders, you're not committing, right now, let me put, for the record, everybody in this room hears you, you're not committing that National Guardsmen will not be moved under Title 10 status into a different state to perform law enforcement functions, to do a mission beyond protection of federal property and
Senator
protection
Duckworth,
of
we
federal
understand
troops?
you have many more questions. Any additional questions would be questions for the record if the witnesses would.
Can you let him
please
answer?
give the best answer, please.
Senator Duckworth, for that question, these troops are deployed in the 12406 status, protecting federal buildings and property. I respect the president's decision space on this one. Is something that we would evaluate in the building if we receive the order.
So your answer is no, you can't commit to it.
Mr. Young, I believe I can defer to him on the specific legalities of
My
this
question
one.
is to you. So no, you cannot make that
I
commitment.
understand that, Senator, but whatever would come into our office and policy, I commit that that would absolutely go through the Office of General Counsel to make sure that whatever we are doing is 100% legal under the law.
Thank you to our witnesses. This concludes today's hearing, and I want to thank you all for your testimony. For the information of members, questions for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. We are adjourned.